전부 다 알 거야. 묘 하나 잘못 건들면 어떻게 되는지. 이런 데는 절대 사람이 누워있을 자리가 아니야.
딱 보니 묘바람입니다.
악지 중에 악지란 말이다.
관부뇌업지의 지천불 수호인신 연기가세 자해 육십갑자 종불하생 위아도제 복입천문이라.
내 꼬르구나! 아무요!
저게 사람관 맞아?
관에서 뭐가 나왔다고 이 사람아!
뭐가 나왔다고 거기서. 겁나 험한 게.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Fresh Cuts. This is Mike. Joining me as always, it's Mr. Venom. What's up, Venom?
Greetings and salutations, geomancers. I doubt we have any of them listening today, but just in case, welcome in. I'm doing all right. How the hell are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. Settling back into the regular routine. Even though I got back from vacation last week, it was like only a couple days of work left, so this kind of feels like I'm actually like back to the normal.
Right.
All right. Also with us, it's Don and Ellie. What's up, Don?
Yeah, what's going on? Always happy to be here.
So this week we are covering a movie that initially released in theaters for a very brief weekend, and I think other than Venom, we were unable to get out to the theater to see it. Also, I think there was another release or two in that same time period, which is why we didn't cover it at the time. But lucky for us, it finally hit Shudder, and that would be Exhuma. And I will take the synopsis off IMDb, which is pretty short considering how long the movie is at over 2 hours. So let's see. We got: the process of excavating an ominous grave unleashes dreadful consequences buried underneath. That is about as basic and minimum as you could get for this. Yeah, and it offers a decent kind of little setup for what the movie is, but I will kick it over to Venom to give his general thoughts on the movie.
All right, so this was an interesting movie for me. This is from a filmmaking standpoint, it's a beautiful film. It's really well made. There's some good performances here, good direction, good editing. I think the biggest issue with this one is going to be the storytelling. This is a very convoluted story, and I know convoluted can generally be considered a negative word. I'm not necessarily saying that it's negative because I did enjoy this story. Now, I've seen this movie twice now. I got to see it a couple of months ago when it played in theaters for like a weekend, basically. And obviously, I watched it again today for the show. But even with the two watches, this is a very long and convoluted story. I mean, the movie comes in at over 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes. And a lot happens. There's a lot going on. There is a very basic storyline that we're following, but there's just a lot of information that's kind of thrown at you. And then there's one thing that kind of struck me as odd, that it almost felt like the movie ended about halfway through, and then a whole nother movie kind of just starts playing. So it's almost like you're getting two movies for the price of one. Both movies are incredibly similar, obviously. They're both supernatural thrillers, but it just definitely felt like they took care of one problem and another whole problem appears. Again, not necessarily saying that that's a negative. I do feel that this runtime is going to be probably a negative for some people. I don't mind long movies myself, especially if I'm engaged. And for the most part, I was engaged with this movie. Now, there's probably not a lot of there's probably not enough horror set pieces for a lot of genre fans. For a movie this long, I was expecting to see a lot more supernatural action, things like that, but it's mostly concentrated into a few scenes here and there, mostly in the second half of the film. But ultimately, I give the movie a fairly high rating. There's not really a whole lot for me to nitpick. I mean, here we are, another foreign horror film with an entire cast of likable characters. Go figure. Why does it seem that only American horror films fill their cast with douchebags that nobody cares about? And here we have a cast filled with characters that I found myself rooting for and hoping that they all survive the events of the movie. And we need more American horror films like this, where I'm not just waiting for the douchebag to get his head cut off, or the slut to get killed and show her breasts, or whatever the case may be. There's legitimate substance here. Now, pacing is going to be another issue for some people. Like I said, because the horror set pieces are few and far between, there may not be enough horror action for some genre fans, for a movie with this kind of runtime. For me, though, I am a fan of slow burns, so I did enjoy this film. It actually does sit on my top 10 as we record this episode, and as we're only halfway through the year, it is near the bottom of my top 10. So whether it stays there or not, the rest of the year will have to dictate that. But I did enjoy this film. It's a film that I think people might have to watch more than once, because, like I said, there's just a lot going on. Especially with the subtitles. I found myself rewinding when I watched it the second time at home, because I missed some lines, because obviously when I'm watching at home, I'm taking notes. So there'd be multiple times or I would miss the chapter name. The movie is cut up into 5 chapters. 5? No, 6. 6 total chapters. And sometimes, it'll flash up on screen while I'm taking down notes for the previous scene, and I miss the chapter title. So, this is a definitely a more advanced watch. I mean, this is not your basic, slasher by any stretch of the imagination. This isn't even your basic Conjuring movie for a supernatural thriller. This thing has a very, very deep backstory with, like I said, lots of characters, lots of different scenarios and extenuating circumstances throughout the film. So, if you enjoy your mind getting twisted a little bit, not that it's the most twisted film around, I'm just saying, like I said, this story, it's just very, very deep. I think deep is a better word than convoluted. Let me take back the convoluted term. It's just a very deep story with a lot of things happening. Multiple times throughout the film, there'll be scenes happening in 2 different places, so you're going to be seeing parallel editing between 2 different scenes going on at the same time. Especially the finale is the biggest example of that. So overall, I really did enjoy the film. Like I said, I mean, I've already said it sits on my top 10 for for the first half of the year. So I'm very happy with it. It's not something that I'm going to rave about, for years to come. I don't think it's not going to be like Metamorphosis with that. I'm still talking about Metamorphosis like 4 years later. So a solid film. I would say good, bordering on great, with some really good performances. But like I said, if you can follow the storyline on one watch, congratulations. Because it definitely took me the second watch to really, really get everything that was happening. And even some of the stuff that they don't highlight in the movie, like some of the mirror reflections and some of the chanting, how it's being utilized, and just there's so much to talk about with this movie. And man, my walkthrough is going to be very, very incomplete, I assure you. This is a 2 hour and 15-minute movie with a lot of story. A lot of characters, multiple antagonists. So yeah, this is definitely a deep one. But if you're into this kind of story, kind of ultra deep supernatural storylines with, familial backstories, basically a cursed family, maybe not so much a cursed family, but a cursed plot of land. So obviously, without getting into spoilers, I can't really talk too much about storyline, but I did enjoy this film. I had a really good time with it. I think most fans of Asian horror, Korean horror specifically, are going to get into this, but like I said, I think the pacing might be an issue for some people. I think the duration might be a issue for some people, and then just the complexity of the storyline is going to be an issue for some people. But if you can get past those three things, I think you're in for a good time, because I know I had a good time with the movie, and the ending is actually fairly satisfying, and something that I kind of rail about with my horror films is unsatisfying endings, but I was actually very satisfied with this ending. So yeah, overall had a great time with it. I wouldn't call this a high recommend, but since it is on Shudder, if you've got a Shudder subscription or access to one, there's no reason not to watch it, unless you don't like subtitles or that runtime is a little too daunting. But yeah, otherwise, like I said, really enjoyed it. So that's it for my general thoughts.
All right, I'm gonna kick it over to Don. What did you think of Exhuma?
Yeah, I'm pretty much right there with Venom. There's a lot to really like about this one. The setup is great. I really enjoyed the the various looks at Korean folklore, because I did some research into this, and a lot of what goes on. I mean, not everything. I mean, some of it's made up for the film, but a lot of the rituals and various different customs that are practiced here is a legitimate thing, and it's kind of I don't want to really use the term inquisitive, but it's really kind of cool to see that aspect of it, because a lot of it is it's a foreign thing. It's a lot of Korean customs, and a lot of their backwards kind of, well, that's not really like the appropriate term, but like a lot of their out of the ordinary kind of traditions and folklorish beliefs that come into play here with, how bodies buried, the steps that go through to how to remove it if necessary, and combating spirits and angry, otherworldly denizens that can be summoned or invoked or whatever. It's kind of a unique take that it handles the film pretty well, and it comes off nicely in here. The characters are really fun, especially since we get two sets of them, which is actually kind of cool, because that does lead into my my main gripe here, which is something Venom hinted, is that it feels like there's two films at play here, and I'm not necessarily sure that we needed the second one. Not going too deeply into spoilers, but I felt the first one was a kind of intriguing story that could have handled being a proper feature-length film on its own. Maybe kind of come in a little bit around like a 90-minute-ish movie, and then we would have been fine with that. But yeah, tacking on that second storyline that kind of comes in just around the hour mark, that just kind of feels like introduced out of nowhere, and doesn't really tie in as much as it should have with the first story, which kind of just gets dropped out of all of a sudden to deal with the secondary issue. But it's not a huge deal, but it makes the film feel less tonally off, where you're dealing with one thing, and then all of a sudden you're forced to deal with a secondary issue that just comes in out of nowhere, and a lot of the first act just kind of gets dropped by the wayside to deal with the secondary story. But if you can deal with that, there's a lot to like here. I mean, like I said, the story's fine. Yeah, it's it has to be convoluted because you're dealing with two separate films here to a point. But if you're fine with it, you can deal with that. But yeah, I don't have too many issues with it. I mean, it's not the top tier South Korean stuff. I mean, it's not Train to Busan, it's not Wailing, it's not Metamorphosis, which are far better stuff. It's kind of like a notch below. But yeah, there's still a lot to like here. It still looks really good, and I mean, you still got a lot of South Korean technicians working on this, so there's a real nice production quality to it. The locations look amazing. The the jump scares aren't bad. Some of the scenes with the supernatural spirits are pretty well handled, and they kind of rein themselves in for what we would expect if this was an American film, which would probably be a lot more of a Conjuring kind of film, or like the Blumhouse style Wandaverse jump scare factory kind of film. So that does kind of give it like that Asian flavor where it goes more for dread rather than jump scares, which kind of makes it a little bit more suitable and kind of makes it a little bit more palatable for consumption, just if you can get past the length. Which, like I said, if you're fine with that kind of thing, then it's not that big of a deal. But I can definitely see some kind of having an issue with it. But yeah, other than that, I don't have too much. Again, it would kind of delve into spoilers a little too much just to fully get it all out. But yeah, I'm right there with Venom. Maybe not a top 5 of the year, but as it stands, I can be pretty happy with this on a top 10 list. In the back half especially. But I mean, we'll see where we go with the rest of the year. But yeah, the last couple of months have really kind of fleshed out my top 10 a little bit more, and I'm a little bit more happy with it. And yeah, if this comes in maybe an 8 or 9 or 10, I wouldn't be too surprised, and I wouldn't be too mad at my list if that happens. So yeah, if everything sounds fine, if you're into Asian horror, you're Korean horror, completist, yeah, give it a watch. Other than that, I really can't say it's a priority watch, but if you're looking to boost your numbers up or anything like that, you can do a lot worse than this. So yeah, it's a fun time, and definitely enjoyed it.
Okay, so I kind of fall in line with you guys as well. It's a recommend for me, but I don't know if I'd say a high recommend, but I do think it's worth watching. I think the runtime could be an issue for some people. I don't really have an issue with long runtimes necessarily, but with that said, with a movie like this, because of the storytelling, you're going to get a lot of story, a lot of dialogue, a lot of like exposition and explaining things in between, like what I guess would be considered like the horror moments, which isn't necessarily bad, but I know for some people it's like not the style they prefer. I also think like to add, because mostly I have the same things to say, but another just small thing to add is this is another Korean movie that it will help the viewer immensely if you just have like a very basic knowledge of Japan's occupation of Korea for a certain amount of years, because they do deal with like the trauma and like the scars left behind from when the occupation ended. There's a little bit of like getting into that. It's not always so direct, but it's definitely there in certain manifestations and things that happen throughout the movie. So like you don't have to be a scholar on it. I only know about it on a very basic level myself. It's just because this is definitely not the first like horror movie out of Korea that deals with those undertones. So like I think at a certain point I was just like, let me read up a little bit on this so I just have a more just basic idea, and it's kind of helped because then you can start being able to pick it up in the movies a little bit. But like I said, I'm definitely no expert on the subject material. Just like if you just read like a brief summary, it'll make sense. I like the design of some of the supernatural stuff we do get. I thought it was well executed and well done. Like Venom said, most every character in this is likable, so you don't really want to see them go through anything bad. And yeah, like it can at times feel like two movies in one for sure. Like it seemed like prior to the hour mark there was a pretty clear path of where we were going, and then something totally different kind of happened, or it takes you on a side mission, I guess, maybe, and that except the side mission becomes most of the rest of the movie.
It's kind of like the sequel. It's like they took the original and the sequel and put them both in one movie, because there's a very distinct part of this movie where it would be a good cutoff, and then the rest of it would be like the sequel, like would be Exhuma 2, and nope, we just get them all in one movie.
And one of the effects of that is like, if I could compare it to like a video game where like you it's at a certain point it feels like you have to do a lot of backtracking over like covered ground, because it's like it's dealing with this new thing, but it's related to set pieces and things we've already got in the movie. So like like I don't know, it's like the rituals are cool. Like I did appreciate like watching the different rituals and stuff, but there are certain points in the movies like, dang, we're going into the full-fledged thing again. Like, wow, okay, interesting like choice. Like, and the only reason that hits your mind is because of the length of the movie, the running time, where it makes you think like, okay, they probably could have taken like a scalpel to some of the stuff and like tightened up the story and made like, maybe I wouldn't say all the way down to like 9, but maybe like an hour 45, maybe an hour 50, because even that would shave off 20-30 minutes, and that would just make it kind of a tighter story. But otherwise, I still found the movie enjoyable. I still liked the story. I thought the setup was really cool, like how or their occupation of kind of like, oh, we're paid to like give a good, healthy, I guess, pure resting place, and sometimes that something goes wrong and you actually have to like move the body. I think that whole aspect is really cool. I did like the sound design that we got. I thought that was really well done. You get a lot of like distinct music in this, probably like I mean, it would make sense that it's local and like self-identifiable to the country of origin. I think that enhances it. Like I had this movie up pretty loud on the, well, I guess loud by like at night at home levels, but and sometimes when you would either get the jump scares or like a setup for something, it would really hit on the home theater. So that was a cool aspect. And yeah, overall I think it actually does wrap up pretty well. Like, definitely not disappointing. And I guess I'll leave it there for now, because otherwise you guys already hit on a lot of points that I was going to make as well. So back to you, Venom.
Yeah, one of the problems with this feeling like there's two movies packed into one is that there's plot points that are kind of abandoned in the film. For example, and I'm not going to get into specifics, obviously, because we're not in the walkthrough yet, but there's an aspect of the first half of the movie involving the coffin that's basically just dropped when the first half of the movie ends, and for good reason, to an extent for good reason. But like, that was the biggest mystery of the first half of the movie is, why does the main mourner, not want this particular event to happen? And they never explain it. They never tell us why. They never even allude to why. So, and that happens more than once in the film. And like I said, that's just another weakness of taking these two very distinct storylines and sticking them together into one movie. I mean, this movie, there's two 90-minute movies here, 100%. Like I said, if you don't drop some of the plot points that you end up dropping, you've got two solid 90-minute movies. And why they didn't go for that is beyond me, but sometimes, especially with Asian horror, longer runtimes don't seem to frighten them too much. We see over 2-hour, maybe not just Asian, but foreign horror in general, we tend to see a lot of 2-hour plus movies coming from there. So they definitely don't have a big issue with the big runtime. I feel like if this was an American movie, especially with Don's example of if this was a Blumhouse movie, yes, it absolutely would have been a jump scare factory. But aside from that, Blumhouse would have absolutely split this into two movies. Hey, more money to be made that way, right? When you think about it. So, yeah. So, I mean, a solid movie, a really good one, I think. Like I said, bordering on great if it's not for one or two issues, like some of the pacing issues and just maybe some of the convoluted storytelling or complicated storytelling might be a detriment to some people. But overall, like I said, I mean, it's in my top 10, even though it is right near the bottom right now and likely won't stay there for the duration of the year. It's still there for now. So, in my opinion, it is still one of the 10 best horror films I've seen this year, for whatever that's worth. Anything else you guys want to say before we get into the very broken up walkthrough where I am going to miss a lot and I'm probably going to rely on my co-host to fill in the blanks?
I would just say, because of the length of the movie, this one should be saved for like when you have minimal distractions, only because it's not, I mean, everyone's different with their time, but like it's not always easy to like rewatch a movie over 2 hours. Not because the movie itself makes it difficult, but not everyone has the time. So like I wouldn't even go into this one unless you knew you had that block of time and you weren't going to be distracted, also because you're going to be reading, well, most people would be reading subtitles, so like don't bother with it unless you can have the time squared away and you're no distractions around you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
this is not a... Oh, go ahead, Don.
I was going to say, you're probably thinking the same thing. This is not just well, I've got time to kill kind of a film. This is, I've got to set time aside to watch this kind of a film.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is definitely not a movie that you want to have other screens on. You know, don't be flipping on your phone, looking at your social media. Don't be playing games on your tablet. Trust me, this is a movie that demands your attention. And if you stray, you're going to miss some plot points. Because like I said, there's literally single line plot points in here that I missed because I was taking notes and, you know, forced me to have to rewind. Obviously, if I wasn't taking notes like I did in the theater, you know, obviously I saw it once in the theater. But like I said, that was 2 months ago. And for a 2 hour and 15-minute movie with a complicated story like this, a rewatch was absolutely necessary. And even with the rewatch, like I said, I found myself rewinding, checking, subtitles, checking information that I may have missed, things like that. So yeah, definitely don't go into this expecting to split your attention. Go into this when you have 2 hours and 15 minutes to invest and watch this film. You know, it's the same thing with The Wailing. You know, you don't want to go into The Wailing and only half pay attention because you're gonna miss something. There's a lot going on in The Wailing too. So anyway, folks, that's going to be your final spoiler warning for the rest of the episode. We'll go ahead and walk through the film. If you haven't seen it, then I would say go ahead and pause and go ahead and check out the film and rejoin us later. Or if you have already seen it or don't care to see it, go ahead and stick around and find out in more detail what we thought about this one. So our film opens up with a rather unusual cold open where we're in a hospital. We see a baby, with diodes and a bunch of different stuff connected to it. So the baby's obviously sick. And we see Hwa-rim. Hwa-rim is a beautiful Korean girl, and she has been tasked with checking this baby. She's not a doctor, mind you. We don't know what she is at this point. All that we really see is she walks up to the baby and she whistles. She whistles a couple of times at the baby, almost like she's waiting for a response. And then eventually she must get the response that she's waiting for because she basically says, yes, this baby is haunted. There's, something is causing this baby distress. It's probably something connected to your family, blah, blah, blah. So what they decide to do is they decide to bring in Mr. Kim, and I forgot to mention Hwa-rim's brother, Bong Gil. These two are basically our quote-unquote exorcists, if you will, for the film. Not a literal term. Don't take it literally, but it's the best term I can think of right now. Shaman, I guess, is what they're called in the films. They call each other shamans. So there you go. They're shaman. After that, we are introduced to Mr. Kim, and Mr. Kim is a geomancer. Now, a geomancer is someone who practices geomancy, obviously. And what geomancy is basically it's the art of placing or arranging buildings or other sites in a way that is either pleasing to the eye, that makes mechanical sense. Feng Shui is something that's brought up here, kind of the Chinese art or the Asian art. I'm not even sure if it's Chinese specifically, but the Asian art of placing items in a room, furniture, things like that in a certain way so that the energy flows through the room, easier. So the geomancer, usually, like I said, in the real world, geomancers are used for building sites, like putting buildings in the right place so that they don't interfere with like airplane routes, or, making sure that you don't put it in the middle of a bad cross breeze where it could damage the building, just different things like that. But in this case, in our film, he is basically a man who is looking for the most pristine burial plots. He is paid to find beautiful places for rich people to be buried. Apparently in Korea, I've never really heard of this practice, but it seems like the richer you are, the more luxury, the more freedom you have on where you can bury your family members. Like, they don't have to go into a cemetery like they do here in the States. You can literally buy a plot of land out in the middle of the woods and bury their body there. Now, to me, that sounds like a cool practice for the person who died, but for the people who want to visit that grave site to have to climb a mountain or go into a deep valley or whatever, it seems like a lot more trouble than it's worth. But in Asian countries, they're more concerned with the spirits of the dead than the convenience of the living, obviously. Whereas in America, it's the complete opposite. So, yeah. So basically, Mr. Kim finds these plots that are either like on a hillside looking over a beautiful valley, that they get lots of sunlight, lots of plant life, things like that. And he grades them on a scale of 1 to 100. So basically, going back to the cold open, what the family of this baby decides to do is they decide to bury the patriarch of the family in a more pristine spot. Apparently, the geomancer wasn't ultra happy with the spot that they were buried. He even says it's like a 65 out of 100. So because of time constraints, that was the plot they took. Usually, when people are that rich and they're paying that much money, he'd want to give them something like in the 90s, obviously. But for whatever it's worth, they got that plot. So they decide to exhume the body, hence the name of the movie, Exhuma. They are exhuming the body, but you can't just dig up the body and just move it. There's a whole ritual involved where you have to ask the permission of the spirit. You have to announce out loud that the exhumation is about to happen so that all the spirits can hear and know what's going on. Everybody's very respectful. I'm sorry, I said matriarch for the cold open. It's the grandmother, that they dig up. And basically, she's been dead for like 60 years. So when they dig her up, obviously, there's no flesh on her bones. She's just bones. But they still do a battery of tests to make sure that all the bones are there, that the grave hasn't been robbed, that, there's no new information about the cause of death, potentially, things like that. And then they do another ritual to rebury the person in their new pristine spot. So basically, their theory was that the spirit of this, the matriarch of this family, was unhappy because of her burial plot, and that's why she's now haunting the family. That's their theory. Whether it works is beyond me. I mean, it seems like the baby gets better. Like I said, it's just a cold open. It already sounds like I'm describing a 20-minute scene, but it's literally just the cold open. I'm just going into more detail than I really should. So there you go. There's our introduction to our main characters. And then Mr. Ko is also a main character. He is basically an associate of Mr. Kim. He is basically the landowner. He's the one who's selling these plots of land to people, whereas Mr. Kim is the geomancer who's picking the spot and saying, this is the pristine location right here. Mr. Ko is the one who physically sells the plot to the family. So they're kind of like a partnership. All right, so after our credit sequence, we are introduced to another person named Kim. This guy is President Kim. He's not like the president of a country or anything. He's a president of a company. And basically, he is a rich man, of course. These geomancers only really seem to deal with rich people because the poor are just going to be buried in, regular cemeteries and whatnot. So President Kim, this rich man, comes to Mr. Kim letting him know that there's something wrong with his son, his newborn son, literally a little bitty baby, couldn't be more than a month old, and that he basically just cries 24 hours a day, just cry literally since he was born. He has not stopped crying. And the only way they can get the baby to stop crying is to sedate it. So they have to sedate it so that he can sleep without crying. So he tasks Mr. Kim and the two shamans, Hwarim and Bongil, to basically move this body. Now, there are extra aspects to this job, and the main one, and this is the plot point that kind of gets dropped, is President Kim tells Mr. Kim, I don't want the coffin opened. I want you to get the coffin out of the ground, do whatever ritual you have to do, but do not open the coffin, do not remove the body. I just want it cremated, coffin and all, just cremate it. Now, obviously, that sounds like a cool little mystery. Like, oh shit, like President Kim obviously knows something about his grandfather that he's not sharing with people. But we never find out what. We never really find out what the big deal is. You know, there's rumors that there's treasure in the coffin, but a little later the coffin does get opened, and you know, we'll talk about that. But yeah, so that's like the major mystery of the first half of this film is, why does this guy not want his grandfather's coffin opened when they're doing an exhumation? Excuse me. So yeah, there you go. So what they end up going to the plot, and Mr. Kim, we see him throughout the film actually tasting the earth. He'll actually take a little pinch of the dirt on the ground and put it in his mouth, and he's actually tasting the earth. Well, he does that same thing here on this plot and spits it out instantly. He knows there's something wrong with this ground. There's something wrong with this plot. Even though it's a beautiful spot, it's overlooking a cliffside, you know, with a beautiful like sunrise in the background, or sunset, whichever time of day it was. It's a beautiful spot just visually, but Mr. Kim can tell there's something wrong with this plot. So he basically tells President Kim that he doesn't want the job. He's like instantly, nope, I don't want it. There's something wrong with this site, and if we remove that body, things could go wrong. And Mr. Kim actually was right, as we'll see. I mean, obviously, we know we're watching a horror movie, so it's more than likely that Mr. Kim is right. Through some, you know, convincing and extra money and whatnot, Mr. Kim finally says, well, okay. And then actually it's Hwa-rim, the female shaman, who actually says that even if Mr. Kim doesn't give permission, that she's probably going to go through with the ritual, because this child, this baby, is suffering. You know, this baby's, for some reason, crying constantly. It might be in pain. We don't know. You can't ask a baby what's wrong with it. According to all the tests that the doctors have done, everything seems normal, but the baby just won't stop crying. So after that, Mr. Kim is like, okay, fine, we'll do it. And then comes the day of the exhumation. They go to the site. They dig up the coffin. They see that it's a very, very ornate coffin, something that's reserved for royalty. But President Kim isn't royalty. He's just a, you know, very successful businessman. You know, the family has money, but to my knowledge, and most of the people in the movie's knowledge, there's no royalty in their family. But somehow he got a royal casket. So they pull out the casket. They see how beautiful it is and ornate and everything, and they're like, okay, let's go ahead and start the ritual. And this is the first ritual of the film, which is a very weird ritual involving 5 dead pigs, horse blood, a live chicken who will soon be a dead chicken, and what else? Oh, and then 5 different grave diggers, one for each pig. Basically, now I may not be correct on this, so bear with me, folks. I might be paraphrasing. But basically, Hwa-rim says that she's going to cleanse the ground of its evil by transferring whatever evil is in the body of this man, President Kim's grandfather, and transferring it into these pigs. And these pigs are already dead, mind you. They're not live pigs. But throughout the ritual, she's dancing, she's chanting, she pulls out these 2 big knives and she starts hacking at the pigs. She cuts herself once to kind of draw some of her own blood, and then she kind of mixes it with some of the horse blood and some other shit that they have there. And she is basically chanting, screaming, not stabbing, but actually slashing at the pig bodies. And then while she's doing that, the 5 men start to dig up the plot. They start digging up the plot, and like I said, that's when we see the coffin and everything else and blah, blah, blah. So they pull the coffin out of the ground. they figure the ritual is done. It's not like it's thundering and lightning or anything crazy like that. They're like, they figure it's done. They take the coffin out of the ground, they put it in a hearse, and then they start to drive away. Unfortunately, as they start to drive away, we see the clouds come in, and literally it's a bright day, and suddenly the clouds just come out of nowhere and darken the sky, and suddenly it's raining. It's raining really, really hard. Well, in Asian countries, they have a superstition, where if it's raining, they don't cremate bodies, because according to them, which doesn't really make a lot of scientific sense, but again, this is spiritual stuff. If it's raining and you cremate a body, the spirit is unable to ascend all the way up to heaven and have a good afterlife. Doesn't make any sense that a spirit would be weighed down by rain, but again, this is spiritual stuff, so deal with it. So since it's raining, they get permission from President Kim to postpone the cremation. They decide to keep the body and the coffin at a nearby hospital in the morgue until the next day, when they'll go ahead and do the cremation. Of course, what ends up happening is, everybody leaves, all the people that are in charge of the body, Mr. Kim, the shaman, all the family members, they end up leaving. But one nosy piece of shit at the morgue just can't, fight, curiosity. So, and he probably heard the rumors too about that grave, about, potentially treasures and shit being buried in that coffin. So he literally grabs a claw hammer and starts trying to jimmy open the coffin. At the instant that he jimmies open the coffin, and he's only able to open it for like an inch, for like a split second. It's not like they take the entire lid off. He opens it literally about an inch for like a split second, and in that split second, we see something come out of the coffin. We don't literally physically see something, but we see the POV shot of something flying out of the coffin, and then it goes right by Hwarim, and it actually, she ends up passing out right after this thing. I guess we can call it a spirit at this point, comes rushing out of the coffin past her. So she realizes, because she's a shaman and she's got divination abilities, she realizes that that something was really evil. That wasn't just a normal spirit, that there was something really bad about that one. And she's able to figure out that this guy, the spirit of this person, the grandfather of President Kim, has been screaming out to the world about getting out of that plot of land. And she calls it, what did she call it? Graves calling. Graves calling is what she calls it. And that's basically dead people trying to speak to the living, from beyond the grave, basically. So she said that this guy, who's been dead for well over 100 years, has spent that entire 100 years trying to get out of this plot, trying to get out of the coffin and the plot that he's buried in, and that now that he's finally been released, he's angry, he's pissed off at the world. And who does he go after? His own family members. Basically, we see the spirit ends up killing his own son in a pretty cool way, too. He actually, reaches into his chest and stops his heart. I don't mean punches through his chest or anything gory. I mean in a supernatural way, his hand kind of goes into his chest and he's able to stop his son's heart. Mind you, his son is about 90 at this point. He's an old man, so no one's going to question him having a heart attack. But then he goes downstairs and he kills his granddaughter or his daughter, I forget, granddaughter, I believe. Yes. President Kim's sister. Basically kills her while she's dancing to something on the television. And then Mr. Kim and the shaman both realize that, oh shit, something's wrong. When that thing got out of the coffin, it wants revenge, and it wants revenge against its family because of where it was buried. It didn't like where it was buried. Obviously, we don't know why yet. That information's coming. So at this point, they're trying to protect the baby, President Kim's newborn baby. They want to make sure that baby doesn't get attacked by the spirit, but the spirit seems to be going in order. First, he kills his son and his granddaughter. Then he goes after President Kim, and what is a pretty gnarly scene. He actually like possesses President Kim, waits until Mr. Kim and Mr. Ko show up to, let him know that somebody accidentally opened up the coffin, but he's already possessed at this point, and he starts speaking very cryptically. He chugs about 6 bottles of water because right after he got out of the coffin and he went to go attack his son, he has a line in there about how cold and hungry and thirsty he is. So then, like I said, we see the possessed President Kim chug about 6 bottles of fucking water consecutively. And then he's looking in the fridge, almost like he's looking for something else, and he starts to turn his head to look back behind him towards Mr. Kim. But then suddenly the head continues turning in a very unrealistic manner. Think Linda Blair in The Exorcist, but not quite nearly that cool. So basically, he starts turning his head to ridiculous degrees, and then right before his neck completely snaps, he says, "The fox severed the waist of the tiger." Something along those lines. I think actually that was it exactly. The fox severed the waist of the tiger. Obviously cryptic and without context. And like I said, then his neck snaps. He falls, hitting his head on the counter, and pretty much is dead instantly. At this point, all of the Kim men, or all the people of that generation and the previous generation, have been taken out. All that's left as far as blood relatives is the newborn baby. And we actually, I'm skipping out a lot of the cool mirror shots in this movie. Like, while President Kim's head is spinning, you can see that there's nothing around him. But in the reflection on the refrigerator, you see a pair of hands around his neck actually turning his head. It's actually a pretty fucking cool shot. And there's a bunch of those in this movie. Some really cool shots where we see people doing something, but then when they look in either the reflection of a mirror or like a piece of glass or like a monitor, a TV screen, they see something that they don't see normally. So they see a spirit, doing something with the person that they are able to see, the possessed person, if you will. So a couple of shots like that throughout the movie that are pretty cool. Okay, so at this point, we see the spirit of this person, President Kim's grandfather, and he's at the hospital with the newborn baby. The nurse that's watching the newborn baby has fallen asleep, so he goes and he starts to look at the baby. Now, at the same time, while all this is happening, and this is one of the examples of parallel editing throughout this film, at the same time that he's there, that the spirit is there with the baby, Mr. Kim and the shaman realize that people are dying. I mean, don't forget, President Kim died in front of Mr. Kim. So he's already aware that he's been dead. Then the word comes that his sister and father have both been killed at their family residence. And so they instantly realize, oh shit, the only person left is the baby. We got to save the baby. So they start calling people, trying to make phone calls, but there's not really much that they can do. The family in the U.S. isn't answering. So basically, Mr. Kim makes the decision that we need to cremate this body right now. Coffin and all, just cremate the shit out of it. The problem is the only living relative left is an aunt, basically a daughter, another daughter of the spirit. She doesn't want the body cremated. She wants the body re-blessed and reburied on a different plot so that, her father's spirit can be at peace. But there's no time for this. Mr. Kim is literally on the phone trying to convince her, you're the only one who can give us permission. We need to cremate this body right now. While all this is happening, the spirit is still with the baby, and we see his hands start to near the baby's chest. Like he's going to do the same thing to the baby that he did to his son, make its heart stop. And we actually see the baby's heart rate start to rise. We see the blood pressure readings start to go up. Like he's not physically touching the baby, but he's very obviously fucking that baby up. And then finally, the aunt gives permission to cremate the body, and the body is literally already in the crematorium. They're literally just waiting for permission so they can hit the button and start the fire. And that's exactly what happens. The aunt gives permission. They start the fire, the coffin starts to burn, and as soon as the coffin starts to burn, we go back to the hospital and we see the spirit of that guy start like shaking, start moaning, like there's something wrong. And then we see the coffin in the crematorium break down, like it burns enough that it starts to break down. We see the bones of the body inside the coffin start to burn. And then the spirit at the hospital completely disappears. The baby's heart rate and blood pressure start to stabilize, and everything seems cool. It's like, wow, we're only a little over an hour in, and it seems like our movie is over. They figured it out. But what ends up happening is once they get the all clear that the baby is fine, Mr. Kim, for some reason, decides to return to the site, to the plot, where they pulled out that guy's body. Don't know why. Maybe he had an inclination that there might still be something there. Oh, no. I'm sorry. I did skip something. I don't know how vital it is, but it's a pretty cool fucking scene. Right after they took the coffin out of the ground, one of the grave diggers that's down there sees a snake, and it's got the circular stripes on it, which means it's venomous. So, obviously it kind of looks like a what is it? Copperhead? Is that what I'm thinking of? I don't know my snakes nearly as well as my scorpions, but it's very obviously a venomous snake. This gravedigger takes his shovel and beheads the snake, basically cuts it in half. When he does this, the snake yells, and we see that the snake has a fucking human body on, a human head. It's a snake body with a female human head on it, and it literally screams when this guy cuts it in half. So he ends up calling Mr. Kim to tell him that ever since this happened, he hasn't felt well. Something's wrong. So he asks Mr. Kim to go back to the plot, find the snake, and give it a proper burial. He actually wants to give the snake a proper burial. The snake with the human female head on it, which we never get any explanation of what this thing is. It's just a random snake with a human head on it. So, take that as you will. So Mr. Kim is back at the plot. He finds the snake and he sees the head on it. It still has a head. The snake is still in two pieces, but he finds the decomposing body and it has a little human head on it, a little female human head. He kind of freaks out and falls backwards and realizes that there's still something in the ground. So he literally takes his shovel and starts clearing out more dirt, and he finds another coffin. Yes, my friends, there is a second coffin, double interment, they call it here. Two bodies buried in one plot, in two different coffins. So, and this coffin is much cheaper looking. It's not a royal coffin by any stretch. It looks like just a basic cardboard box, or whatever the cheap wood that they use is for criminals and whatnot. So he finds this thing and he calls the shaman and Mr. Ko to come down there and help him out. They start digging this thing out and they realize it's buried vertically. It's not buried flat like, most people would bury their dead. It's literally standing up on its end. And when they pull it out, the coffin is like 8 feet long. At one point, somebody even asks, is that a human in there? And they're like, yeah, I think so. They end up figuring out that the body in the long casket is the shaman that originally, no, he's not that shaman. He's basically a fox diviner. Somebody who can communicate with the foxes and control them and whatnot. But he died during war. He was a samurai, a warrior. And like I said, folks, I'm missing a lot of information here. So if you're interested and you haven't seen the movie, I would strongly suggest you watch it to get all the information that I'm missing, because I'm missing a lot. So basically, this guy was a fox diviner, and he was also like a shaman, wise man, monk, whatever you want to call him, in the area. But he was an enemy soldier. He was actually a Japanese soldier in Korea, and during the early parts of feudal Japan and China, China and Japan did not get along. Excuse me, not China. Japan and other Asian countries, so like Korea, Taiwan, places like that, didn't get along with Japan. So this was a foreign soldier buried on Korean soil, which means he basically became what the shaman calls an anima. And an anima is a human ghost or spirit that evolves based on a cursed object. So basically it's buried or it's trapped during death with a cursed object of some kind, and then it somehow evolves to actually become corporeal. He's actually a physical manifestation. This guy's not a ghost. When we finally do see him, he's not a ghost. He is flesh. And we'll get into that in a little bit here. So they find out who he is, that he was an evil fox divineer who was buried here by the Koreans as a foreign soldier. And that's why he was buried vertically. It's disrespectful. Since he was a foreign soldier, they probably buried him upside down, if I know disrespectful gravediggers. So there you go. So we've got so this is the start of our second movie now, where we are dealing with the Fox Divineer. And we actually do get his name in the film, but I forgot what the hell it is. It's some long name, whatever. But anyway, as it turns out, there was a bunch of monks that buried this Divineer there on that plot, but they didn't want people being able to pull him out, knowing that if anybody ever unburied him and pulled him out, that he would come back to life. So what they did was they buried President Kim's grandfather in a royal coffin, because if people see that royal coffin, they won't keep digging. They won't, continue trying to, rob the grave or whatever. I mean, obviously, if they're there for money, they're going to see the first coffin. They'll rob that one, but they'll leave the one below it alone. And that's the intention. They don't want anybody to ever know about it. So, okay. They eventually find out that the cursed object that the anima has evolved with is an iron rod. And what the iron rod is it's basically stuck in the ground near his burial site. And that iron rod is basically his connection to the world of the living. As long as that iron rod is there and stuck in the ground, he can be there and he can be corporeal. They don't explain this in so many words. I'm just kind of filling in blanks here, just based on what I think is happening. So, oh my God, there's still so much going on. Sorry, folks. Long ass movie. So after they figure out who he is, they take the casket, which is wrapped in barbed wire, by the way. It is an 8-foot-long casket wrapped in barbed wire. So there's a very obviously something inside that somebody didn't want coming out. But they still decide, let's cremate this one too. Let's just go ahead and cremate it and get it over with just in case. Mr. Kim is convinced that this second coffin belongs to the family. I mean, he even says, I'm sure, in exact words, I'm sure this coffin belongs to the family. Like, why would you think that belongs to the family? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can make the assumption, but to say I'm sure, it just seems silly. And that's just the first of many things that he's wrong about as the movie starts to go. Mr. Kim is a weird character because he seems like he's a kind of a badass, solid head on his shoulders kind of guy as the movie starts. But then as the movie goes along, he almost starts to show his age a little bit. Like he starts to be a little bit more forgetful, or his mind wanders more, things like that. It's kind of weird. I'm not sure if that was intentional or if that's just something that I noticed, but there it is. He was like the most badass guy in the first act, and then by the third act, he's almost a blubbering idiot. Almost, not quite. Anyway, let's see. So they take the 8-foot-long coffin. They don't have a hospital or anywhere to put it, so they put it in a barn at the local Buddhist temple. The shaman create a circle around it, with rice and horse blood to keep whatever's in the coffin in the circle. But then that night, people start getting attacked. One guy, the one Buddhist monk that's still at the temple, ends up getting his liver ripped out. Unfortunately, I don't think we actually see that. That's done off screen. And then we get to see one of the guys that's like a laborer working the land at the temple. We see him get his head completely torn off, which was pretty fucking gnarly, actually. Basically, he just tears this guy's head off, and then our shaman arrive. Huarim and Bongil, excuse me, both realize they walk into the barn and they see that whatever was in the coffin is out. It broke out of the coffin. The barbed wire is broken. And since that circle was around the coffin, it literally flew out the ceiling. Because since it couldn't step outside of the circle on the ground, it just fucking went straight up, went right through the barn ceiling, the roof, and that's when he started going on his killing rampage. So then we get a scene where Huarim runs into it, and this is where we see that, holy shit, yes, he actually is about 7.5 feet tall. He's dressed like a samurai. He's got a badass samurai outfit on. And he's flesh. He's physical. He's like standing there. He can interact with people. Like I said, he's already ripped off one guy's head off and ripped the liver out of another guy. He ends up asking, "Are you human?" And Huarim, being, a smart chick, says, "No, sir. No, my lord. I'm not human. I am your servant." And then he says, "Oh, have you prepared my fish and wine for my evening meal?" And she doesn't answer right away. And when she doesn't answer right away, that's when the anima realizes, oh, you are a human. So then he starts to give chase. At one point, she sends one of the laborers, one of the manual laborers, to go get help. But he gets his head ripped off eventually, too. So at this point, he's already ripped off two people's heads and ripped somebody's liver out. He starts chasing Huarim, and then Bongil shows up with an iron rod of his own. Is it the iron rod in question? Probably not, because he goes to stab. He basically goes to impale the anima with the rod, and the rod just stops. The armor stops it. It doesn't even cause any damage at all. And the anima basically grabs him, and then he starts... he actually does jam his hand inside of Bongil's torso, obviously with the intention of taking out his liver, because this guy has a thing for livers, apparently. Later in the film, there's even a possessed character talking about, livers, yay. So he tries to rip the liver off of Bongil, but then Mr. Kim and Huarim go to try to help Bongil, and the anima grabs them both and lifts them both up off the ground. At that point, he drops them both and just decides, I don't know if maybe he was out of time, because I don't think that this thing can be out in the daylight. It seems like he has limited time to be able to be outside of his grave, because then out of nowhere, he just drops everything and he turns into a fireball. And that's not hyperbole, my friends. He literally turns into a fireball. And in what is actually a spectacular shot in this movie, we see the fireball just start flying around the air just above the area where, the barn is and where our three main characters are. And it's a pretty gnarly scene to see this fireball acting like no fireball we've ever seen before, changing directions, spinning in circles, just really cool looking scene. And then suddenly it just leaves. It just decides, fuck it, I'm out, and just leaves. And that's the end of the scene. At this point, they take Bongil to the hospital, but he's lost so much blood that he's in a coma. He's not responsive right now. Huarim, his sister, gets a couple of her shaman friends, a couple of more shamans, a mother and daughter team, to come and watch Bongil at the hospital while she goes and does what she needs to do. She finds out through I don't know if it was a hallucination or a flashback, or it might be some kind of information that she got from her dead aunt, because yes, we do see her and her dead aunt together. It's not a major plot point, but there's a couple of times where we'll see this old woman standing behind her or sitting behind her in the back seat of her car. That's her dead aunt who is with her as a helpful spirit. So she doesn't ever speak in the film, but we do see her a couple of times. So from her dead aunt, she finds out that this guy is a Japanese ghost. And apparently the rules in this universe are Japanese ghosts don't need reasons to kill. A Japanese ghost can kill anybody just for running into them, for crossing their path. Literally, they kill indiscriminately. I've never really heard of that before, but there it is. Japanese ghosts are incredibly brutal and incredibly violent, homicidal, just nuts. So she realizes that they may not be able to deal with this guy until they find that iron bar, that supposed iron bar that's, jammed into the ground near his burial site. So what ends up happening is they develop a plan. They realize that the spirit, and then after that, the next morning, Mr. Kim once again goes back to the original plot site, where both coffins were buried. He ends up falling over and exposing the anima. But the anima is basically just like a statue underneath the dirt. So it's, like I said, it's almost like he can't come out when the sun is up or something, like a troll type thing. So literally he goes and he lets the shaman, both of the shaman, the one who's not in the hospital, Hwarim, that's his actual sleeping spot. That plot is where he sleeps. It's where he feels safe. So he keeps going back there, in the morning right before the sunrise. So they come up with a plan to lure him out using some sweet fish, because apparently he asks for sweet fish multiple times in the movie. So it must be, the anima's favorite food from when he was alive. So they are able to lure him out. Somehow Hwarim knows that he's not going to come out until midnight, that midnight is like his time to, come out of the grave and, go on his little rampage for the evening. And that's exactly what happens. At exactly the stroke of midnight, we see a hand come out of the plot and grab the first fish. And they basically left a trail of these fish leading away from the plot site and to a tree, this really cool ass gnarly tree, where Hwarim's plan is that she's going to set off a bunch of sage and a bunch of stuff that creates smoke so that the area looks all smoky, and that she's going to play the guise of the mountain spirit, the spirit of the mountain, if you will. And basically that's exactly what happens. The anima takes the bait, walks right up to the tree, and then we hear Hwarim in her most menacing voice say, "Who are you and why are you on my mountain?" And then they start to actually have a conversation. The anima says, "Oh, this is your mountain? I didn't realize that." And she basically, as the mountain spirit, tells him, you shouldn't be here, you don't belong here. And that's when he starts to tell his story of how he was a samurai warrior, fighting for the great country of Japan. He ended up coming here during a battle, ended up getting captured and beheaded by some local shaman there. And then that's when they buried him, vertically. So it's very similar to like the Headless Horseman backstory from the 1999 Sleepy Hollow movie. Go figure. So at this point, he's still having his conversation with the quote-unquote mountain spirit, but it's actually Hwarim hiding behind the tree. At the exact same time, Bong Gil, who is currently possessed by the anima, is basically mirroring everything that the anima's doing. Every line that he speaks, he's also speaking back at the hospital room with the other two shaman, the mother-daughter shaman team. Like I said, folks, a lot going on in this movie. So at some point, while the anima and Hwarim are having their conversation at the tree, Mr. Kim and Mr. Ko are frantically digging through the plot site looking for the iron bar, the supposed iron bar, so that they can pull it out of the ground and it would supposedly sever his tie to the world of the living. Unfortunately, they're unable to find it. And by the time the Anima realizes that that's not the mountain spirit that he's speaking to, he starts to give chase. You know, once he realizes that it's Huarim, he starts to give chase. And then he realizes that the sun is about to rise, because then he turns into a fireball and goes to return to the plot. The problem is Mr. Kim is in the plot right now, still looking for that supposed iron bar. When the Anima gets to the plot, he does the same thing to him that he's been doing to multiple people, trying to reach in and grab his liver. Unfortunately, at the exact same time that he literally penetrates Mr. Kim with his hand, Huarim and Mr. Ko show up to try to thwart his efforts. He's unable to do it. They're unable to do it because, like they said, this is a Japanese spirit. He's ultra powerful. So he literally is lifting both Huarim and Mr. Ko up in the air, one with each of his hands. And Mr. Kim is on the ground, not passed out, but definitely in a bad way. But then he starts to we start to hear his inner monologue, and he starts to make a realization that there is no iron bar, that the Anima is the iron bar. The iron bar that's stuck into the ground, that's cursing this plot, is the Anima himself. The fact that he is there, physically present, means that he can continue to be there, physically present. So then he starts thinking more metaphorically, and he starts thinking, okay, well, what's the opposite of hot metal? And he says, oh, wet wood. And as it turns out, because most swords comprise of a piece of metal and a piece of wood, they are like the counter to each other. He starts to realize that, metaphorically anyway, wet wood is the opposite of an iron bar. So he takes this staff that he found earlier that had a bunch of geomancers' names on it, like 6 or 7 of them. And these were the original guys that buried the Anima in this plot. People thought that they were grave robbers because they were going around with what looked like grave robbing tools, but they weren't grave robbers. They were just trying to make sure that evil spirits like the Anima doesn't, rise up again. So basically keeping them in the ground with the burial techniques that they used. So once Mr. Kim makes this realization that the opposite of hot metal is wet wood, he takes the staff, which is now covered with his own blood. He basically takes some of his blood from his wound, his, almost liver removal wound, spreads some of his own blood on the staff, and then puts it down on the Anima's foot. And it literally holds him down. It's almost like a fucking 10-ton weight was put on the Anima's foot. He can't get up. He's like stuck to the ground. And then he picks up this staff, and it's literally just it's a carved wooden staff. It doesn't have any sharp edges on it, just a carved wooden staff. He picks it up and he buries it into the Anima's shoulder, very similar to Jason getting the machete in his shoulder in Friday the 13th Part 2. Literally, it's buried in his shoulder, splitting his shoulder open. And he's basically sitting there dying. He starts to have a flashback, not a flashback, but kind of like he's coming to terms with the fact that, okay, I'm going to die here. This is my final stand. So he says, I need to hit him one more time. And we see the old guy, bloodied, tired, beaten, lift up the staff one more time, bring it down, and it literally cuts the Anima in fucking half, diagonally. Like, not literally across the waist, but kind of like from like left shoulder down to the right side of the waist, like a diagonal cut, and it just cuts him in half, and then instantly the clouds part, it stops raining, and, everybody at that point is safe. They take Mr. Kim to the hospital, and, because he's on the brink of death. He's, basically saying goodbye to the world, thinking that he's going to die. But then the scene fades to black. And when it fades back up, Mr. Kim is in a hospital bed, and he has survived, believe it or not. And not only has he survived, he's well enough to be able to go to his daughter's wedding in Germany, which is something he was talking about throughout the film. And then we see, and then the final scene of the film is Hwarim and Bong Gil back in their home village doing, their basic rituals that I guess that they always do in their hometown. We see Hwarim actually trip during her ritual, which is the first time this whole movie she did something imperfect. We see her kind of fall. Bong Gil, who's kind of like the lead musician of the group, stops the music and gives her a chance to get up and kind of, recover herself. She's able to then get up, continue the dance. Screen fades to black, and that is Exhuma 2024, my friends. Like I said, a very long movie with a lot of story points. I probably went over 30 to 40% of what's going on in this movie. There's still, we went over the major big plot points, but there's so many little things, little subtle things here and there. Like Mike was saying earlier, the sound design is beautiful, and no one's actually mentioned the score yet. I loved this score, especially early, because I don't know what the name of the instrument is, but it's that like Japanese drum that we hear like at sumo matches. And yes, I watch sumo, so I'm very familiar with this instrument. But yeah, like throughout the first act of the movie, like stuff will be happening, and then you'll get one single drum hit, and all the audio cuts out. And it's just such a great effect throughout. But yeah, like I said, the score is really good throughout. Good direction, good editing, decent kills. We don't get a lot of them, unfortunately. I think only like 3 people die in this whole movie, 3 or 4. A couple of them are in shadow. One is off screen. So this definitely isn't a gorehound film. But if you're into the supernatural, if you're into complicated stories, then yeah, this would get a good recommend from me. I'm not going to say that this is vital viewing by any stretch, but you could definitely do a lot worse for 2024. So I would still recommend it. And I'm going to send it over back to Mike.
Good enough and efficient walkthrough for this movie. There's a lot to it, a lot of exposition, but you hit the main points. I also thought the guy was dead when it faded to black. I thought they were
totally
just gonna have.
Well, I thought Bong Gil was dead when the first time when what's his face tried to rip his liver out. Mm-hmm. It's like the screen faded to black and everybody was crying, and then it fades back up and he's in the hospital. So yeah, very few deaths in this movie, but the ones that we get are pretty cool. So I'll take it.
I did dig like the, well, I guess it's a pun to say I dug the gravesite. Get it? But like, I did think it was pretty cool.
I kept questioning how the hell were they getting in and out of that grave? There was no ladder. By the time they dug up the second coffin, they were like 12 feet underground. And I never once saw a ladder.
Back, it was like a few more feet added. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a minor point. It's silly, I know, but the whole time I'm like, how are you getting in and out of that hole? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I do kind of find it interesting, like just the kind of like the cultural customs with burial and stuff, and like I think you made the point at the beginning of the walkthrough about like if you have financial means, you kind of just pick where you want to be buried, and there's a whole ritual that goes in it, like to you have to face this direction with the air or the elements kind of like coming in this direction, and it's almost like their own science behind why they do things. It's pretty.
Well, it is a science. Geomancy in real life is an actual science. But like I said, it's used in the real world more for buildings and sites and things like that, not really for burial plots.
Well, yeah, it would almost be like the equivalent of like our civil engineers or something. Where
thank you, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
What else? That's probably it for me too. Don, you got anything before we wrap this one up?
I'm trying to think back. I think we pretty much covered most of the stuff I've got. I don't know where. Yeah, most of the stuff I'm looking here in my notes, I think we've pretty much covered most of it.
Okay, cool. All right, then. Well, that's going to wrap up our discussion on Exhuma and this episode of Fresh Cuts. But before we get out of here, let's find out where else we can be heard. So, Venom, do you have anything new since we last put out an episode?
Well, we still have the latest episode of Creature Comforts. That's episode number 27, looking at the 1987 Cockroach Run Amok creature feature, The Nest. That's still our latest episode. We're still deciding on our next episode, which hopefully will be sooner than later. And then we actually, Mike and I and Miss Lacey Lou did get together this past weekend to record, finally, after a couple of months, a new episode of the Crystal Lake Gift Shop, looking at episode number 5 of the original series, and that is the Halloween episode. So that was kind of an extra little cool thing to talk about the Halloween episode of a Friday the 13th series. So that's in the editing process right now. I would say look for that episode sometime next week. Since this is a show that doesn't have any kind of real timely schedule, I'm not going to worry about getting that episode out overnight by any stretch. So it'll be out when it's out. I would imagine next week sometime I'll have it ready for everybody. And that's pretty much it. Obviously, the main show, episode 60, is still our latest episode. We do have episode 61 already planned out. And look at that, Miss Lacey Lou is going to be joining us for that one as well. So we got a lot of Lacey Lou on the No More Room in Hell podcast feed, so that's fun. Better, yeah, definitely. More Lacey Lou is always good. So there you go. And that's pretty much all I got, guys.
All right. How about you, Don?
Yeah, latest episode of Creature Comforts. I think we've lobbied a few picks, but I don't think we've settled on what our next episode's going to be. I am on the latest episode of the main show, which is a double bill of wild Asian zombie movies. So that was a lot of fun. And the only other thing is the second to last episode of Horror Countdown's current season. I have one more to go before we close up shop for the year, but the current one is still available, which is horror films that had a director that only did one genre film and had other films that were. He's more notable for films in other genres. That was kind of the criteria, which is not just somebody that did one and done, or maybe they've done a couple fringe movies, but they're he has like other films in the outside the genre. He has the one film, and then everything else that he's done is outside the genre. So, yeah, just one more to go, and then we'll be done for the year, which is going to come out next week. But, other than that, don't have much else.
All right, cool. As far as I go, nothing else out yet other than what Venom has mentioned. So that made it quick and easy for me. And then as far as Fresh Cuts next episode goes, we're back to the theaters this week. It's going to be, what is it, Quiet Place? Is it Day One? Yeah. Is that the subtitle? Day
yes,
One.
Sir.
Okay, so it's a prequel.
Yeah, like I needed a freaking prequel. Didn't we already see Day One in the last movie?
Kinda, yeah. I mean, you can make that argument that we got. It's like it was only a scene of a look still. At it, but
yeah. It's still A Quiet Place, so I'm maybe not nearly as excited to see it as I was to see the second one, but I'm still gonna sit through it. But yeah, we're at the theater for the next 3 weeks in a row, so that should be fun.
I was gonna say this is the start of this was the start of a run, right? There was like 3 or 4 of them that were coming out.
For what I can see, 3. We've got Quiet Place this week, Maxine next week, Long Legs the week before, the week after that, and then a couple of weeks after that, I think we got that. What's that? Speak No Evil, I think, right?
Oh fuck! That remake's going to theaters.
Remake of it.
Yeah, I'm not excited to see that movie in any way.
I didn't even like the original.
I've never seen the original. Wait, did I see the original? I don't think I did. No, but I saw the trailer for this by accident. It played before a movie, and I had forgotten my earbuds, so I ended up having to watch it. But God, I don't like these kind of horror stories. I don't know, just something about, it just, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, there's good actors in it, so I mean, at least it's going to be a well-acted movie. I'm just not excited for this story at all, and I already know I'm going to have to watch it, so I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I literally have no interest in seeing this movie.
Well, and the other problem is, so like, unlike Dawn, I did like the original, but the problem is I'm going into this one pretty much already knowing everything. Like, I'm sure there's a chance they change one or two things about it, but like overall, it's like I already know everything that's going to happen, and I really have my doubts that it's going to be a better version. So it's like, I guess that's just
What year
how
was
it
the
goes,
original?
so.
22.
A couple of years ago, I think.
Oh, it's only
And
been a couple of years. Okay.
I believe it was on Shudder. Like, that's how I first saw
Yeah,
it.
it came out it was an original. I think that was one of those ones we missed because there's a theatrical one.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, this is a foreign movie. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Well, yeah. From the looks of it, we have our next few episodes planned out already without us even having to think about it. So, with that said,
That's good.
Thanks
I hate
everyone.
thinking.
Yeah. I know it's too hot to think right now. Thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of Fresh Cuts. We will be back in a week's time with a new episode. Let's say bye to our listeners.
Later.
I don't care how rich you are. Put your damn dead relatives in a cemetery. At least then, when the zombie apocalypse comes, they'll all be concentrated in one place. So, come on.
Yeah, or just cremate them in the first place, and then you don't have to dig them up to cremate
Oh
them.
my God, yes. I could do a whole podcast on my issues with burial, like the whole concept of burying somebody's body. It just seems like a way to burn $10,000. It's like, oh, here, I don't need this 10 grand. You have it. No, it just seems dumb to me. Cremate me. Actually, I don't even want to be cremated. I want to be freeze dried and shot into space. I want to see the cosmos as I drift into infinity.
Yeah, burying people in the ground also isn't good for future suburb developments. So,
yeah,
another
watch
reason
the
not to do
documentary
it.
Poltergeist. Yeah, that documentary tells you all about it.
All right. Peace.
Adios.